Characteristics of connective tissue are that, first of all, they're most abundant tissues type in the body, but much different from some of the others. Their cells are further apart than epithelial cells, certainly, than muscle cells we'll talk about, and even the neurons. Between the connective tissue cells, there's a substance called the matrix, and that matrix is different in each type of connective tissue. It's going to bind things together, provide support and protection, also serves as a framework. It's going to fill spaces, store fat, produce blood cells, protect against infections, and help repair tissues. That extracellular matrix is composed of both protein fibers and what we'll call ground substance. Its consistency varies from a liquid in blood to solid in bone, and everything pretty much in between. Most connective tissues have a good blood supply. They are well nourished, but their vascularity is going to vary depending on the cell type, and that will have an important impact on their ability to heal and repair. Most connective tissue cells are capable of dividing, but not all of them. So the most common types of cells in connective tissue would be fibroblasts. That would be a cell that is making the matrix. They are large star-shaped cells that secrete fibers into that extracellular matrix. Another common type is a macrophage. A macrophage originated in the blood as a monocyte, has gone into the tissues. It's capable of doing phagocytosis, so it's going to be looking for foreign invaders like bacteria and engulfing them and eating them and using them to activate the immune response. So they are very important for us in our defenses against infections. Mast cells are another inflammatory cell. They are very large. They release heparin, which slows blood clotting. But they also release histamine, which is a very potent inflammatory chemical. In fact, you probably realize how important it is because most of the over-the-counter drugs you take to treat yourself when you don't feel well are antihistamines, which are not attacking the organism that's attacking you, it's attacking your response to that organism. Fibers within the connective tissue would include collagen fibers, which are really thick threads of collagen. It's a main structural protein. It has great tensile strength, and it's even a little elastic. It's found in ligaments and tendons in great abundance. In fact, collagen is the most common protein in the human body. There are elastic fibers, sometimes referred to as yellow fibers. They have the protein elastin, and they have branches in them. They can stretch and go back to their original shape, which is why they're called elastic fibers. They're not as strong as the collagen fibers, but we find them in places where that elasticity is needed, like our vocal cords, respiratory air passages. The reticular fibers are thin branching fibers. They're also made of collagen, a different form of collagen. They form a delicate supporting network. And reticular fibers are found in regions of the spleen and in the liver in particular. Collagen does make up about 60% of the weight of bone and cartilage, the largest percentage of skin, tendons, and ligaments. It is the most abundant protein in the human body. And when we have issues with collagen genes, that can translate into some genetic disorders such as chondroplasia or Marfan syndrome. We're going to categorize connective tissues into two major groups: the connective tissue proper and specialized forms of connective tissue. That connective tissue proper covers most of the general things we just talked about, whereas the specialized ones have some very specialized functions. So connective tissue proper can also be divided into two groups, either loose connective tissue or dense connective tissue, and that has to do with the matrix itself. So loose connective tissues would include areolar, adipose, and reticular, while dense connective tissues would include dense regular, dense irregular, and elastic. The specialized ones we'll talk about are cartilage, bone, and blood. Areolar connective tissue is is used to form thin, delicate membranes. Most of the cells are fibroblasts. It has a gel-like ground substance. There's a lot of collagen and elastic fibers in it. We find it in the subcutaneous layer, just below the last layer of the skin and above the muscle. It's in fact found beneath most epithelium, and it helps to nourish epithelial cells. Remember, those are avascular. The next is adipose tissue. Adipose tissue is also called fat tissue. The nuclei gets pushed to one side, and most of the cytoplasm is filled with a big droplet of oil. That's very important as a cushion and insulation. We find it distributed beneath our skin in the subcutaneous layer. You also find it behind the eyeballs, and when we get to the endocrine system, we'll talk about a disorder that leads to changes in the appearance of eyeballs because of that fat layer. It's around kidneys and heart, and it's also in the space between muscles. The reticular connective tissue is composed of thin reticular fibers. It's used as support walls for internal organs, such as the liver and the spleen. The dense regular connective tissues are closely packed collagen fibers, forming a network with elastic fibers. Most of the cells you find are fibroblasts. It is very strong, and it withstands pulling. It's going to bind parts of the body together. In fact, it's going to be a major component of tendons, ligaments, and the dermal layer of the skin. It has a very poor blood supply in general, which means it's very hard to heal. So you know, if you tear a tendon or a ligament, that's going to take a lot longer to heal than if you fracture a bone. Dense irregular connective tissues are the fibers are not going to run in that parallel direction. They're going to run in several different directions. It's going to almost be an interwoven structure of collagenous fibers. That makes it very good at withstanding tension and that gets exerted from different directions. The dermis of the skin is a good example of dense irregular connective tissue. It's also found around skeletal muscles. Elastic connective tissue has more of those elastic fibers, does contain collagen fibers as well. There are also fibroblasts there. We find this at the attachment between the bones of the spinal column. It's also found in the walls of hollow organs like the large arteries, the aorta right outside the heart, and that's very important. That elasticity allows the aorta to conserve some of the force that the heart exerts and helps to move the blood through the body. It has the ability to stretch and recoil. The specialized types would include cartilage, which is a rigid specialized connective tissue that provides a support and framework for attachments, also protects underlying tissues around it. It serves as a model for developing bone, which we'll see when we talk about the skeletal system. Its matrix has collagen, and it's in a gel-like ground substance. Cells themselves are called chondrocytes, and they live in small chambers within cartilage called lacunae, which literally means little lake. They're surrounded by matrix. They do not have a blood supply, and cartilage also heals very slowly. Torn cartilage is tough to heal. It's covered by a connective tissue layer called perichondrium, and that perichondrium is going to supply all the nutrients to the cartilage below it. Cartilage comes in three major forms: hyaline, elastic, and fibro. Hyaline cartilage is the most common type. It's got fine collagen fibers in it. We find it on the ends of our bones and the joints of our nose. In respiratory passages, when we talk about articulate cartilage, it will be hyaline cartilage. And it is also going to be used as our first skeleton during embryonic development, provide a model to build bones. Elastic cartilage is flexible because it has more elastic fibers in its matrix. We find elastic cartilage in our external ear and also in our larynx. The fibrocartilage is a very tough. It's got a lot of collagen fibers in it. It's a very good shock absorber. It is going to make up the intervertebral discs between the bones of our spinal column. It's also going to be part of the knee and pelvic girdle. Bone, or osseous tissue, is the most rigid of the connective tissues. It has a solid matrix composed of mineral, mostly calcium, salts, and collagen. It provides support structures. It protects some very vital structures, produces blood cells, all of the blood cells. It also can be used as a reservoir for calcium and phosphate to be released or stored as we need it or have excess. It's an attachment site for muscles. It forms a skeleton. It contains bone cells. Those bone cells are called osteocytes, and they are in a similar structure to what we saw in cartilage, called the same thing, a lacunae, little lake in Latin. Bone comes in two different forms, compact and spongy, and all bones as organs have some compact and some spongy. It's a ratio that is different among types of bones. Compact bone has the osteoblast matrix outlined in a layer, so it's a laminar, and that laminar occurs in rings around a central axis. The osteocytes and the matrix and the central canal form a cylindrical unit called an osteon, and the osteons are cemented together to form compact bone. The central canals containing the blood vessels and the nerve and the lymphatics. Bone does have a good blood supply. Bones heal relatively quickly, especially compared to some of the other connective tissues you find associated